welcome back to tnsradio.com. I think that should resolve the issue there, folks. I had my young son upstairs apparently was on the internet, even though I warn him upon pain of death not to do such thing when I'm on air. Anyway, sorted. I have Mike Montagna on the line with me. Mike Montagna was, as you know, just on with the guys on OAM radio. And Mike, there was a couple of points of clarification or something you just wanted to bring up, was it?
Let's see. You mean on that document?
Well, you know,
finishing the show. There's always further points of clarification till we get to the bottom of all of it. Actually, you might refresh my memory what you have in mind there, and we'll just go from there if you had something on your mind.
The presidential thing for a start. I mean, we had talked about that before.
Uh-huh.
You know, I don't know if have you moved from your position where you were last time? Last time we had a conversation.
No, I haven't. I mean, I have no. I don't think any decent person should have an ambition to be the so-called chief executive of any country. I think this concept has a lot to do with why the world has the problems it has. That is, we hand over the responsibility of government to others. And though we have checks and balances of some kind, they're ineffective in preventing malfeasance. And so theoretically, I'm opposed to the fact that we have a president. In fact, if we didn't have the kinds of governments we have, we probably would have no war. We certainly wouldn't have taxation in the manner that we have. And in truth, a huge part of this idea of mathematically perfected economy is resolving all of that. That is distilling government down to the only thing that serves us, which is an infrastructure for us to interact with each other. That's all government really has a rightful place.
Let's do with this, Mike, if you don't mind, just for a second, because you know this is the bugbear of a lot of people when they try to. At least I found this when I've been trying to explain MPE to people. MPE, short for mathematically perfect economy, folks. You know, people say to me, "Oh, but what about the roads and what about the schools and the colleges and the hospitals?" And
that's what it's all about.
This is exactly so. And just to go back to another little point you made there,
the question is, when you use a road, do you want to pay for 3x roads today, 11x roads tomorrow, 123x roads the day after that, and so forth, until you're paying so much for the road you can't afford to use it or maintain it?
States, but for example, this happened here, Mike. What they did was there was a big valley, the Liffey Valley in Dublin. Okay, big ravine or gorge, call it whatever you will.
Oh, that's bad. You probably need to fill that in, right?
Well, by American standards, it's probably a pothole, okay? You know, I know you got Grand Canyon and whatnot, right? So they decided to build a bridge across this pothole. And they built the bridge and everything was tickety-boo for a while. And then eventually they said, you know what, we need to put a toll bridge there. But don't worry, the toll will be very cheap. You know, you'll hardly notice. You know, a couple of coins out of your pocket.
You know, this is the very thing that got me interested in economics as a young child.
Well, this gets better, right? So they say eventually, you know, sure, toll bridge, everybody. Well, it's only a couple of coins. Fine, you know, we suck it up. Basically.
Yeah, except you had to stop and think all the energy you're wasting, getting going again, and waiting, and you know.
Initially, though, you see, the traffic wasn't that bad. This was before Celtic Tiger.
Still have to stop.
Kicked in. They had their ducks lined up. I'll put it to you that way. And eventually, of course, the charges started getting higher and higher. And then eventually, they realised they were bunging up the city and the flow of traffic too much. So they put in the electronic version of it. You know, you buy a gizmo, you stick the windscreen, you lodge on through your bank account, etc., etc.
Yeah, next thing you know, your checks are bouncing.
Oh, right, you see. And of course, we were then told, well, look, initially, you're going to have to just pay a couple of coins until the bridge is paid for. And of course, now it turns out that the bridge is going to have to be paid for, inverted commas, ad infinity.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we're never going to reach the end.
Yeah, but that traces right back to the obfuscation of the currency, which is imposing all these ever greater costs on government as well, and that's why they need to generate streams
Well,
of
this
revenue.
trying to make the people. You see, I think when I try to talk to people about their homes and their properties, for some reason people aren't getting it. And I found it real simple to use a toll bridge as an example, particularly the M51, because now everybody in Ireland knows. Never mind paying for your hospitals, your schools, your bridges, or anything else, your bin collections, whatever. Nobody in the country, that combined wealth of the entire nation, will never ever be able to pay just for one toll bridge, folks. Never.
Right,
Now,
that's true.
now
And
realize
and
all
in
the other.
truth, that's part of the thing that the reason that we have to have absolute consensual representation, because all these things, revenue streams, are created ostensibly with a given purpose, which seems justifiable to pay for a bridge. Yet what they become is a continual, persistent means, even after the bridge has factually been paid over many times, to continually stream revenue into a government, the costs of which are perpetually escalating as a consequence of this obfuscation of the currency. And I don't know why it's so hard for that to understand. I mean, I can draw it out on a blackboard and kindergartners get it, you know.
Well, I've got a way to explain the bridge to people, and I've said, okay, if you look at, and I'll get the exact figures for you folks, because I'm going to do a little YouTube video about this, because it occurred to me it was a good idea and a good way to explain it. What I actually worked out, Mike, was that if people, instead of allowing anybody to construct a bridge, had they just been throwing coins off one side of the ravine from both sides of the ravine, the number of years that the bridge is there compared to what they've paid for it, they'd actually be able to drive across on the coins.
Somehow I knew you were going there. Hey, I got a great story in regard to that.
The money.
I got a funny story because, I mean, this is really what got me thinking in terms of economy when I was a young child. I had an interest in math. Might have explained it. It revolved on my grandmother was really teaching me how to read by sounding out what how letters were pronounced when I was taught the alphabet, and I was going through my father's airplane design books and trying to fathom the mathematics was obviously the most important part of it. So I got an early interest in mathematics at like 3 years old. But at the same time, this is a funny story relating to your bridge story. I got, like, for Christmas when I was 3, I got something that was kind of an advanced toy for my age. It was a record player, and it had, several, like 45 records on it, my favorites, they were child's, fairy tales, and my favorite story, I think it was called Three Billy Goats Gruff, and it was about this a ravine like you're talking about with a bridge across it that had some troll, some monster who every time you would try and cross the bridge he would get in your way and demand a toll, and then these
Is that the one?
Pardon me?
Not by the hair on my chinny chin chin. Is that the one?
That could be it. So this big Billy goat butts the troll off the bridge and just goes across, and he's the hero of this fairy tale. And I don't know why, but I mean, I just love that story. I would pick up the player head and I'd put it at the beginning and I'd play it over and over again. I was like, yeah, when that Billy goat had butt this monster off this bridge, he was trying to collect a toll from everyone. So about the same time, I'm at the same age where I noticed the first time that we crossed the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and here we are, and it's like 6 lanes of traffic merging into 2 going our way, and at this toll booth, and here we are, and we're stopping and we're giving up money, and I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? Dad, don't give him the money. Let's just go. And So, I had to ask, well, what are we paying for? Why did you give him the money, And, my parents tried to explain to me that, they were paying for the bridge. So then I asked, I said, well, so how long is it going to be before it's paid for? And they said some long time off into the distance. And I said, well, how much did it cost? I wanted to do the math, and divide the dime that it cost to go So next time we crossed the bridge, I asked if I could give him the money so I could ask the guy how long it was going to take to pay for the bridge. And of course, I didn't get an answer. But the next thing you know, the toll increased to 15 cents, and the next thing you know, it was a quarter. And I mean, to me, a quarter was a big. I mean, when you had a lemonade, sale, when you were a kid, quarter would be more than you would make for all day sitting outside trying to sell lemonade or something. But so anyway, on and on, it went. It got more and more and more expensive, and to me, there was obviously something very wrong there that I saw, as a young child, largely, because it was my favorite fairy tale, this Three Billy Goats Gruff thing, which I wore out like it was a Bob Dylan album or something.
But what was the line from the Billy Goats? It wasn't Chinny Chinny Chin apparently.
I can't even
Correct
remember exactly.
line. There was a message in that line.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, he just refused to be charged, and
Yeah.
eventually he just butts this guy right off the bridge and walks across, and the other two goats with him.
Mm. But I mean, the idea. Even if let's imagine you and I, Mike, for example. I know. Let's go to an impossible universe for a moment, and let's imagine you and I were actually in charge of the financial system on the planet, and we were
Oh,
running
wouldn't
the
you love the
scam
day?
as it stands. Now, let's imagine we were running the scam as it stands, right?
Oh, the
That's the
scam. Oh God.
well, for want of a quick description, let's just stick with scam for the moment. So we're running this present system, okay? Would you think it would not? I would be saying to you, hey, Mike, would you not think it'd be prudent every now and again we let them think they've paid for something in full and shut down the toll bridge? And they're
Hmm.
not even doing that. They keep leaving. It's like they leave all these examples lying around everywhere for us to see that nothing ever gets paid for ever.
Well, there's an impetus for that actually, and that is this disparity between the central bank and what I call the peripheral banks or the intermediate banks, which interface with the people. They're actually, falsely borrowing the falsified debt from the central bank to purportedly loan to us. So they become indebted to the central bank like we become indebted. And then as this multiplies debt upon us as we're paying interest and principal out of circulation and having to borrow that back as a new debt, increase so much as periodic interest, that's increasing our debt, which jeopardizes our ability to service an inevitably terminal sum of debt, which exceeds our ability to service it. So that compromises the peripheral banks. In the meanwhile, the peripheral banks are trying to find further ways to make ends meet. So, all these schemes are developed to sell things that don't exist or lease things that don't exist to pretend they're assets, which justify credit worthiness to borrow further. And this is the Enron scenario of the world. And none of these things make sense. None of them are right, but the reason that they arise is because of the impossible nature of this scam. As far as letting people pay something off goes, no, they put a carrot out in front of us that the value of our property is appreciating, and that's not true at all. That the value of property depreciates as we consume of it, and the idea of this carrot, of course, is that you're making out. And I asked real estate people. I mean, it was just kind of one of my fun things to do. Real estate people. They serve this scheme, and to our ever greater detriment themselves. So this one real estate agent was advocating that that I buy this real estate, and he actually screwed me out of the deal in the end. He never even presented my offer. I was buying a home for cash in Marin County, California, which just a few years later was valued at more than 10 times what I was about to pay for it. Anyway, I asked him how this all worked out. That he was saying it was going to increase in value, and so I should get it. And he didn't want me to pay cash for it. He wanted me to go for a bank loan to quote establish credit, the very thing that Alexander Hamilton advocated the United States do in the beginning of our country here. And I said, no, I just want to pay cash for it. I had the cash, so. Anyway,
no, you don't.
Huh?
We're not allowed to do that here anymore. We're not allowed to pay for property in cash anymore over here.
There you go. I mean, they're just ensuring What's that?
I say, I wonder why. Can I just go back to you a little bit, something you said there a moment ago, Mike? You were talking about the accumulation, this build up in the system. And I wanted to run this by you as well. I was trying to come up with a term to explain this to the younger generation, if you will. And I came up with a little idea, for example, trying to explain to a kid. Kids know about video games, for example. Young lads, they know about video games, and they do understand the concept of the refresh rate for the video game. And, I basically said to it.
That's a pretty advanced concept, but yeah, I can see why they would intuit that, yeah.
You get that. They understand, every time you move the joystick forward, the whole thing has to check, have you been shot? Are you alive? Move the pixels, move the background, move the foreground, move the other characters, and then it goes through the loop again and again. They call that the refresh rate. The refresh rate, rather, is how often it does that per, how many cycles per minute or whatever.
Right.
And I was just thinking, the refresh rate of the currency system is actually what we perceive to be this increase in value, or rather what we're told is this increase in value, which is like you say, well, you bought the house 10 years ago for 100,000, now 10 years later, it's worth $1 million.
Yeah. Well, so I asked this real estate agent how that works out,
Right.
And he says, well, you pay $100,000 for the house and you sell it for, $150,000 10 years later. And I said, oh, hang on. Then to get the same house, it's going to cost me $150,000, so that nullifies my profit right there. I said, but how do you figure it's a profit that I made $50,000, even if that weren't the case? I said, you're paying all this interest out of circulation and having to borrow that back as new debt, assuming a further debt. And I mean, this is going right over his head because he's a jerk. He doesn't want to understand it. And so what was his answer? He finally shrugs his shoulders, and it's because I'm forcing him to be accountable for the interest that you're paying as well. You're not just paying the principal. You're not paying $100,000 for $100,000 house. You're paying whatever, $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 for it, depending on what the interest rates and term of the loan are. And so, when I force him to account for that, he shrugs his shoulders purposely, evading it, saying, well, you got to pay something for the use of the money. In other words, he knew perfectly well you weren't making profit on it at all.
Yeah, they keep perpetuating this lie. It's a downright lie, folks.
Yeah, but there you have a regular citizen participating in it for their own role and livelihood.
Well, look, Mike, I'll be honest with you. I'm sure many people out there are thinking the same thing. Sure. We all fell victim and fell foul to this. Not necessarily because we were unthinking, or although that probably describes it better than anything. Yeah. But, genuinely, most people are so busy getting on with their life, and they're so busy struggling, and it's the struggle that stops them reflecting. And it's really, folks, what I'm saying to anybody listening at the moment is, now that the economy has hit a bit of a brick wall in Ireland, the so-called economy, I'll correct myself. It's hit a bit of a brick wall. There's plenty of people at home, and they're worrying, Mike, and they're suicidal, and they're upset, and they're having all these processes started against them, foreclosure, eviction, repossession orders.
They need to hang on. We need to hang together on this.
Yes, absolutely. And on top of that, folks, if that's you and you're listening, please get in touch with TNS Radio. We will do whatever we can to try and assist you in any way, shape, or form, even if it's just to try to give you an understanding so you know. You see, once folks have an understanding, Mike, once they get the idea, so that's how I'm being screwed. In other words, if you don't know how you're being screwed, well, who do you go to sort it out, you see?
Right.
Do you go
You
to the
don't even
bank?
you don't even
Or,
know what orifice to look at.
exactly. I think most people have a fair idea.
Yeah,
But
most of us intuit
they
this,
just
but
don't, they just don't realize how many people are back there shafting them.
uh-huh. That's something that really needs to be made clear is that that this proposition of mathematically perfected economy is two things. It's a proof that this system inevitably fails. It's not a something of a brick wall that we're hitting. We've hit the brick wall. We're into the brick wall. The front of the automobile is blasting the bricks apart. We're sinking into the brick wall. We're all canting forward in our seats, and we're about to collide with the dashboard, go through the front windshield, whatever, is the result of hitting the brick wall at the speed that we have. And the result of it is we're losing our property and all. And it's important on the one hand to understand that the banking system has caused those conditions which
Yeah.
make it impossible for us to sustain ourselves. They are responsible. And it's only by understanding how they did that that we can defend ourselves and prevail in every court in the world. Because
Now,
it's
just on that one point, Mike, that's precisely where I wanted you to go. Just to, sorry for interrupting you, but just
not a
for this
problem.
is what people, this is what I want. You see, again, I'm talking here to the average man and woman who took out a mortgage, they have the three-bed semi, etc., a couple of kids. Suddenly they're faced with a dilemma. Now, what's happening in Ireland, Mike, what again, inverted commas, government are offering to these people is that's okay, don't worry. You sell the house, you sign away all the residual value perceived,
Interest-free,
well,
interest-only loan, yeah.
perceived residual value, okay,
Hmm.
in your home to us. And now we'll pass that into a local authority, a local housing authority, like a council or whatever. And now you're renting the home from them.
Right. Let me just translate all that. It basically amounts to this. Because the system doesn't work,
Well,
because the system is terminal, we are going to just take possession of the home and charge you the most that you can afford to pay so you can stay in it. Okay?
yeah,
And so your payments are translated to what they are today. But if those are fixed, you're in trouble still. Why? Because we're still multiplying the sum of debt in regard to all the interest we're paying out of circulation, and in order to maintain a vital circulation, necessarily borrowing that back into circulation as new debt above a former sum of debt. So your house might not be killing you itself because the payments have been raised to the max by this totally devious obfuscation of the currency, which the banking system is attempting to contend with itself in stealing from you, in adjusting its stealings from you in the case of the house to the max possible. But by holding you there, being as the rest of our debts are going to continue to escalate, therefore infringing on our income all the further, they're going to make it impossible very soon, because the debt is escalating at such a rate at this time in the terminal stages of the system. You understand, as the sum of debt escalates, the periodic interest that we're paying out of circulation is ever more in proportion to the circulation because it's a proportion to the escalating sum of debt. So we're paying more and more and more interest out of circulation, having to borrow that back into circulation through one means or another, whether it be government overspending or whatever, as new debt above a former sum of debt, making it all the more impossible for us to sustain ourselves. So though your interest-only mortgage might resolve your payments, denying you of any potential to actually own the home at all. It might establish some method of let's say magnitude of payment which seems survivable at the present moment. Sorry, tomorrow, that's not possible any longer. So it's but it's all about the bank stealing from you. So this is why we've organized these arguments for people. And so even if they have an interest-only mortgage, sorry, it's going to count all the interest toward principal. And most people who fall into that situation, at least the first people that do, will generally be can't afford to make ends meet because medicine, health costs, food, gasoline, everything else is rising, eroding the spendability of. Huh?
Just so you know, sorry for interrupting you there. We lost you there for a couple of seconds. Skype had connection problems your end, I think.
Oh, okay, I'm not even looking at my monitor here.
Well, I mean, I think we got most of what you were saying. It was just coming and going a little.
What I'm saying is we're resolving that for you too. That those people who are resorting to interest only mortgages, that's a dire thing to have to resort to. But this transition to mathematically perfected economy is going to count all their payments of interest instead toward principal. Most of those people will own their homes outright by an immediate transition to mathematically perfected economy. And you know what the arguments are. I mean, you and I have a lot of communication.
That's
so
real clear to everybody who's listening. Let's imagine, folks, I just need to give people a little math here, Mike, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's say we're talking a home somebody moved into, say, 10 years ago that they paid approximately 100,000, as the so-called price for the home. And they've been paying the mortgage for perhaps 10 years. Where would they stand under MPE if they successfully went through the transition into MPE? Where would they stand now, do you reckon?
Well, whether they're in foreclosure or not, the 10 years that they paid for the home would be multiplied by 12 because the basic disparity in costs is this. In mathematically perfected economy, we're just eradicating banking. We're getting banking out of the equation. Banking is a lie. It's an ancient ruse of the money changer, and it's been a cause of world problems since I can trace it back to 1500 BC. Thereabouts.
Sure.
And in fact, the Bible says, the Old Testament, says, thou shalt not charge usury, which means in the ancient expressions, just and more. There isn't any way to distinguish in the terminology of the time between interest and usury, nor is there any actual difference between interest and usury. As an essay, 1975 essay of mine, interest is usury, pronounced. Anyway,
just be able to the 10 years later, you're a homeowner, and where do you stand, Mike?
You've been paying. Well, the simple answer to the question is you've been paying 12 times as much as you ought to under mathematically perfected economy. When we count all the interest toward principal, you would be approximately 12 times ahead on your payments. So you would have made 120 years of payments on a home which maybe has a 100-year lifespan, and therefore you would own your home free and clear. A good example of that, lady friend of mine.
Something though. I'm aware there are different mortgage products out there.
Yeah, and the math works out a little differently, but that's the overall picture.
Typical mortgage I would be relating this to would be what's known as an annuity mortgage. And an annuity mortgage, for example, your first month's payment would be 1%, and that's probably being generous, 1% principal, 99% interest, and the 20-year period, you're paying 1% at the end of the period. You're paying 1% interest and 99% from principal.
That's another thing that people don't understand, which is really important to emphasize. Is they think, well, we're paying 5% interest out of circulation, so the debt isn't increasing much. Baloney. That's what happens when you buy a new home. Your first payment is almost entirely interest, none toward principal. So there's a huge amount of interest that we're paying out of circulation. And borrowing back as new debt, because interest resolves none of the former principal, borrowing back as new debt above a former sum of debt. The escalation of indebtedness is phenomenal, and believe me, government figures don't, or banking figures don't even come close to reporting the truth.
Can we deal with this, Mike? This is very important, I think, for people to understand. The very fact that they're taking their interest first and the tiny fraction, if you will,
All
for
further part of the, the greed involved,
yeah, but
and
the point I'm making is this is why when you hit a courtroom, folks, they're assuming most of the value, if you will, of the ownership, the perceived ownership of the property is still residing with the bank because they're
right,
claiming to have paid a fraction of the value of the home. In other words,
exactly.
you still, yeah, in other words, after paying your mortgage for even 10 years, you still, on a 20-year mortgage, let's assume with simple math, you've
The
hit 50,
banking
60.
system is trying to deny us accumulation of equity at all. So the court will look at it and say, "Well, you haven't hardly even paid any of your principal down.
Uh,
Buy the property doesn't belong to you. You know."
yes. In
But
other
this
words, you
is why
still,
you have to
well,
understand this interest thing. That there's no warrant that the banking system charge you interest because they never gave up any commensurable property equal to the debts that they falsify to themselves for merely publishing further representations of our promissory obligations. We're not borrowing money from banks. They're creating money to pretend to loan it to us,
and in fact,
which money
see,
only
look,
represents our promissory obligations. You're
you look at
borrowing
the
your own contract.
exact, thank you, because if you look, folks, please get out your mortgage documents and have a look. They don't actually say they lend you anything. That's not what they say. They use all these terms and people make assumptions about them. Like, please go look at a mortgage contract, look at what they're asking you for in theory, and then you go and look those words up in a usage dictionary or even just the Oxford English Dictionary, and then try to work out what's happening when it hits a courtroom. And I'm guarantee you will see it. You will see the deception right in front of your eyes. It'll just snap in like those magic eye pictures people look at. You will actually go, ah, now I see. And
Yeah.
once you see, you can't ever unsee, Mike.
Oh no.
Once people get mathematically perfect economy, boom, it's locked in your mind. It doesn't come back out.
You
It bores
finally
in.
saw the truth. You had no idea how stupid it was to think that you were borrowing money. You go to a bank, you sign a contract for the principal, and they hand you a representation of it. They didn't
Yep.
give up property equal to the paper that they're going to turn over to you, which they're going to pay to the real creditor who gives up property. The banking system never gives up any property in the whole thing. They don't produce any property, nor do they have any legitimate way of acquiring it, because this is all a ruse. And I mean, that sounds preposterous to think about it, that it's all a ruse, you
Well,
know?
let's put the other set of criminals in here as well, Mike. And I believe criminal is the correct term
Oh,
for
it
them. The
is.
solicitor
It's even being
that
kind, because they're very lowly criminals.
when you have a mortgage, when you're supposedly going for your mortgage or whatever, most people go and engage a solicitor to represent, in brackets, their best interest.
Right.
And the solicitor stands there, and the bank slides the paper to you, or the bank's solicitor slides the paper to your solicitor. Your solicitor slides the paper to you. You sign it. You slide it back to your solicitor. They slide it to the bank's solicitor, and the bank solicitor slides it to the banker. And I
And
stood there watching that process, and I said to myself, "This is really strange. Why is
yeah.
why is this going?"
Nobody, no question mark, no question mark was raised. No question mark appeared
Ah,
above one person's head.
somebody's pulling a fast one here. Something just didn't happen.
Well,
And
you were
sorry,
asking about an example for children. I used to speak about when I lived in Marin County in the Bay Area of California. I mean, there was just all these groups would collect, and I'd speak to people, well, sometimes hundreds of people at a time. And before a rock concert, I'd start a discussion. I have all these people gather around me, just tremendously interested in this. In fact, I mean, they call me the president in Marin County because, it fondly is a matter of respect. Although, as I was explaining, I'm adverse to, the idea of a president, and people have actually, urged me to run for president, especially when I speak publicly at all times. But one time I had, like 100 people that I was talking about mathematically perfected economy, and this one person said that they were a teacher, and they wondered if I thought I could teach this to children. And I said, well, I would sure think so, because children's minds aren't poisoned by just assuming that all this is just. They don't understand what it is yet. And they basically challenged me, and quite a few people concurred, to challenge me to do a test case to go to their school. This person taught a kindergarten class. So I was invited like a week later to come to the school, and I was very busy, and I had no time to prepare for this at all. And on the way driving there, I thought, now what am I going to do? And basically, as I got to the classroom, I just happened on a thought. I remembered playing a game of marbles when I was a child. So it was called Poison, and it had a rectangle with in each corner, on a dirt field, you would dig a little pocket in the ground, and there was one hole in the middle, and there was a pattern that you went around this. These 5 holes. You had a starting point adjacent to one, and if you pocketed your marble in a hole on your turn, you got a further shot. If you shot a competing player's marble, you won their marble. And also acquired another shot. So the first one to complete the course won, and whatever marbles you might win on the way was your winnings. So, as I got to the class, the teacher introduced me, and I says, so I just asked the kids if they played marbles, and they sort of, half did and half didn't. And I asked them if they knew this game Poison, and a few of them did, and a few of them didn't. And so I explained the game, and they thought it was a pretty cool idea. And I said, so suppose I gave you all 5 marbles, and we started to play this game, and they're all enthusiastic to go try this out. And I said, but suppose every time we play the game, you have to give me one of your marbles. And they all looked at each other and back at me like I was totally full of crap. What a jerk. And I says, well, believe it or not, that's what your mother and father do when they pay for a house. And they were dying to understand the whole thing, and we went right through it, no problems whatsoever. And the teacher's jaw was just dropped. But they all got it. They all got it right off the bat.
This one just came in. One of the guys in the chat box. I won't say the name just yet. This happened when he was getting involved in the whole mortgage deal. The solicitor he had representing him, or his interest, if you will, was also representing the bank.
Oh yeah.
And he didn't know. He wasn't told about this at the time. Now, in theory, folks, that can be done, but the solicitor is supposed to inform you that they're acting for the bank as well. If they haven't, and you can prove that they haven't, boy, oh boy, can you take them to the cleaners, even under the existing so-called system.
Oh, sure, that pertains to any matter at all. That's a conflict of interest. In fact, I don't even think you can legally do that over here.
No, well, here I know it's been done, but again, they're supposed to inform you, So just be careful for that one, folks. Do check your documents. As I said, look, all's fair in love and war, Mike, correct? And, we're being attacked. We're being attacked in our intellectual pockets, if you will, and our actual pockets, I suppose. We're being attacked by a system.
More so in the actual pockets, and we're failing to rise to the intellectual occasion.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're getting out there. We're spreading. TNS
Oh,
is
oh,
growing
oh,
big.
oh, yeah. You're instrumental in this. I mean, God, I mean, I was up all last night. Calls that really precipitate from TNS. And I mean, I have people from all over the world tell me that maybe the best thing I ever did was to broadcast from TNS. I have to take some time out here to finish the tools for us to prevail in this battle. But you know,
I think people thought maybe perhaps, oh, Mike and Vin have had a falling out or something, and I kept saying to
you and
people, no,
I,
no.
well, that would never, uh, no, for the audience sake, I mean, Vin is one of those people that did his research beforehand, and he finally decided that I was the beginning of this, and he'd call me up and find out if that was the case, and it wasn't just to pat me on the back or something like that, but to investigate the matter. And I mean, you have a gentle, considerate touch in what I like to say are arguments, and I don't mean vehement emotional reaction, but arguments are our case for whatever our positions are in any matter, and you've always had a graceful way of doing that. No, I mean, I was kind of pissed off the last time I did a radio show. It was just because of this. I believe that we have to evolve to a personal state where we, as you are very capable of presenting our case to each other in an always constructive way. And what's wrong with the internet is people can pretend to be authorities. They can plagiarize others' work. They can give the arguments wrong. People can say that those are right. Then they begin defending the wrong arguments as if they're the right arguments. They attack the original author of the right arguments. And I go through this all day long, every day of my life. And I'm more than tired of it. But when somebody just barges into interaction, as someone did in the chat room that day, and starts firing off all this derogatory stuff, which you don't really have time to react to, I have a problem with that. Problem is that if we're going to prevail in this, we have to start holding each other accountable. Number two, we really have to eradicate all of that behavior. It needs to be against our rules. Why? There's never a case where merely vicious, egotistical reactions, pompous pretension of authority, which is offered always without qualification, which makes it ego and ego only. These things take us nowhere, and until we're ready to eradicate them from all our intercourse in life, we're not going anywhere. No, I mean, you and I mean, we'll always be friends. There, have been other TNS broadcasters who've done things that have been offensive to me, which, sometimes I don't have anything to say about it. I don't care. I mean, it's lower quality behavior that we should all see through. But the thing is, when we allow people who are actually detractors, who don't have a solution, who are impeding our way to solution, and they get in the way, and we allow them to, we're not going anywhere either. It's just a big red light out there, and we need to deal with it. And I've always had on my own forums that I've hosted, I've always had a rule, and that is whatever you post, you have to prove to be true. And if you don't do that, the post goes away and you lose your posting rights. And I reserve the right to do that to you the first time. And you'd be amazed what that does to a forum. It means that everyone has to participate in a constructive, veritable manner which serves the whole. It gets rid of all the jerks. And I just, I deal with jerks on a constant basis. I mean, every 5 minutes, some days, I'm notified of another plagiarist who's borrowing my work, doesn't have the arguments right, and is leading us astray in another direction. We have to sew that all together and overcome it. And it's just like anything else. If we're building an
Still,
airplane, it's got to
I think we
fly.
can do that though, Mike. I mean, I can see that happening. I can see it's becoming more cohesive and it's getting out there. Listen, I really need to take a song break if you get me.
Okay.
So, folks, yeah. I'll be back just after this. Actually, what am I going to play? Yeah, okay, I'm going to put on a bit of Cat Stevens. This is a nice mild tune, folks. Back just after this. Sorry, Mike, need to go. Do TNS Radio, the wonderful Cat Stevens. Okay, we're still live with Mike Montagna. And Mike, well, sorry, because I was doing so many things during the break there, I had to feed the dogs as well. I kind of lost track. So, very sorry, Mike. What was the last point you were making before we had to break?
Oh God.
Okay, you too.
I mean, I'm usually not too absent-minded. I'm working on it's a 8 or 9,000 word document right now, which is could change the world itself. It's a submission to the Wolfson Economics Prize, which is the highest economics award under the Nobel. But I was asked to participate in this contest, which asked for a contingency plan to minimize the damages of a potential breakup of the European Union. And I say tongue-in-cheek when I say potential.
Whoops. Have I lost you there, Mike?
Everything went quiet on my end there for a second as I finished there, but I'm here.
So I've just put a link into the chat box there for people to have a look. policyexchange.org.co.uk. .org.uk. Assets Wolfson. And if you click that, folks, you'll see what exactly they're talking about there. This is the Wolfson Economics Prize 2012. £250,000 in sterling apparently available. Mike, that'd be a nice little bit of hip change.
Well, Ruth Phillips has, helped me yesterday to the wee hours of the morning, and today as well has put the final touches on it. She's, among other things, an English teacher, which, I'm qualified to do myself. But,
I know exactly what you would do if you got your hands on that finance. But why don't you just tell everybody what would you do if you had access to that class of hip money?
Well, that will finance, this world mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation, and if the people can pin their names to it themselves, we're flying after that. It's a world-changing event, and the people that have seen my document, which has to remain confidential as part of the prize rules, it can't be published until they've announced the winner. But the people that have seen it for constructive criticism, everyone to the person so far who's read it has responded. It's a dead nuts winner. It's a proof of a singular monetary and political solution, which is anyone who's followed what we've done here at TNS would understand. Is I've been singing the same tune since 1968, and that is that we're showing. We're demonstrating, we're proving in this document that an immediate transition to mathematically perfected economy resolves all the issues. So that's what my submission amounts to. The whole world has an interest in it because the issues which reflect on the disintegration of the European Union are the same issues which pervade the world. Excuse me.
Situation for a second, because I don't believe for one single second the European Union is going to break up the way they say. I'm not saying it's not going to break up. It's not going to happen the way they say, even though that more than likely they will control what happens. I mean, we know the way these guys operate, okay?
Right.
Um,
But they're
but what's your
afraid,
opinion?
evidently, that they're excuse me, that they're going to lose control of the process because, of course, countries like Ireland, Greece, Italy, they're in debt positions which are untenable, as are the rest of the countries, really, in truth, as well, although they may not be in as pronounced a bad condition. And yet those countries are ostensibly the countries that further debts are going to be loaned from in order to sustain the other countries. I mean, it's a preposterous thing.
Sure. This one for me, this one actually, I actually laughed out loud when I read this. I think it was last week I read this. Now, brace yourselves for this one, folks, if you haven't heard. They're still actually trying to get other countries who are not members of the EU into the EU right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was reading it. I was going, wait a minute. Now, what country, supposedly in their right mind, let's just take it as a separate entity for a moment. Now, what entity in its right mind would enter into a scheme whereby initially that was formed, and now it would seem 4 members or 5 members are in dire straits because they joined this scheme? Who would encourage anybody to join? Who would tell their people, their population, "Oh yeah, it's a good idea. We'll join the euro. We'll be all right, boys."
Well, they'll
No
just
way.
claim that, of course, but the real reason that other countries might join
Oh,
would be some kind of coalition where they're convincing that country that it has some kind of
well, they need
protection
they,
or way to prevail over its people, regardless of the improprieties of what's the malfeasance which is transpiring under the people's noses that the people have to get a handle on. In fact, lending to the
they're absolutely gobsmacked, and I did literally laugh out loud, and it was involuntary. I didn't
it
mean
is funny. These things are funny when you.
hell.
But to set the record straight, my entry, mathematically, a proposition of mathematically perfected economy is being entered in the Wolfson Economic Prize.
Okay, now somebody has put in the chat box, and again, I don't know how true this is, but maybe somebody could confirm that. Apparently, Bill Still and Roger Hayes have entered into that for going for the same prize. Now,
That's
I don't know.
okay. My submission disproves every other submission that can be made. It proves
Okay,
a
but
fact of singular solution. And Bill Still and Roger Hayes has agreed to debate me, but the debates never happen. And if you want it to happen right now, you wanted to call Roger, I'm glad to debate him. Bill Still's he's a plagiarist of my work. Bill is advocating 100% reserves, which would reduce, if you're speaking about gold reserves, and I speak in algebraic equations. So regardless of whatever he's saying, I'm ready to respond to. But if he's speaking about gold reserves, that would reduce the per capita circulation to about $266 per person in the United States to resolve all our debts, to convey our commerce, to pay our salaries and wages and whatnot. It's absolutely impossible. It's a stupid idea. Anyone who would advocate such a thing has never even done the most rudimentary math of stepping
yeah,
into these
we're
problems.
mathematics here. I mean, folks, why are these guys not buying the same calculator you have or I have, or what's
No,
going on?
what they're doing is they're reacting more or less emotionally. They're saying, well, this would work. It sounds good. It sounds like it fits the pieces together, but they never tie all the ends together. There's no
Okay, well,
proof of his work. But as I
that's
just proved on the other program, I just basically reiterated the proof of one and one only. Mathematically perfected economy is a singular integral solution for 3 categoric faults: inflation and deflation, systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, and inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of falsified indebtedness by unwarranted interest. And the solution is an obligatory schedule of payment, retiring principal at the rate of consumption of related property, and an eradication of interest. Plain and simple. None of these
that's
people have ever
you've just
invalidated
heard the
that.
whole thing in a nutshell, folks. That's it, right there. If you've been recording this show, stop, rewind, save, and play that again and again until you get it.
Let me
because
read
that.
what this Wolfson Economic Prize goes. I mean, yeah, they might be trying to, solicit other, nations to enter into this without warrant, but they're not appealing to the populace of the country with a true presentation of what they're doing, what they're imposing upon us, and what the ramifications are. That's never been done in history. No intelligent public has ever given its assent to this obfuscation of the currency, which they already have in these other countries. But this European Union is basically an umbrella government over purportedly or ostensibly assented national governments, which the people of the nations have no sovereign rights within, no sovereign right to dictate what their government is. It's a way of denying us self-determination, and that's all that's really happening, so that a banking system can prevail eternally.
Realize, Mike, that the banking system, folks,
It's driving
it's
all
like a
this. That's
spider's
why they
web.
call it
Finger.
the European Economic and Monetary Union. You know, it's the banking system that's driving it, and that's apparent in this Wolfson Prize question. This whole quest for an answer revolves around this one question. I'll just read it really quickly if you want, because I mean this will put things into what we're talking about into perspective. The 2012 Wolfson Economics Prize challenges the world's brightest economists to prepare a contingency plan for a breakup of the Eurozone by seeking the best answer to the following question. This is a quote, all of this.
Yeah.
If member states leave the Economic and Monetary Union, they're calling it that. If member states leave the Economic and Monetary Union, what is the best way for the economic process? They don't even say what an economic process is, and of course it isn't an economic process, as everything that Bill Stills and all these other people will propose. What is the best way for the economic process to be managed to provide the soundest foundation for the future growth and prosperity of the current membership?
Okay, can I ask a question based on that question or that statement? Well, I know it's the question that. Oh,
sure.
Pardon me, hit my button. Okay.
Pandora's box just got opened by that question, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. Is that question not an admission?
Sure.
The system that they know, folks,
Yes,
they've already known for a long time. But how come, Mike? And I mean, I know I've been posting about MPE everywhere I can think of, and I know many other people have been. And of course, you've been doing so since 1968, a year before I was born, folks. Mike. Let me just, I don't think people appreciate that 44 years now, Mike.
Right.
Now, here's the question.
I never thought I'd have to do this long.
And as I said, and that's why I said I knew what you would say.
Bill Still is the problem, by the way.
Absolutely. But I mean, I need to make this point because I knew what your response was going to be when I said to you, what would you do if you actually won the prize money? I knew you'd put every single penny into getting MPE out there. And I think folks need to hear, I'd like to hear from you again. I mean, I know what you're going to say, but I think folks need to hear this. Why, Mike? Why are you offering MPE to all the people on the earth, which is really what you're doing? And I think it's a hugely significant thing. And I admire you for that. I mean, I really do. It's such, folks, when you really grasp it, it's such a significant gift, and this intellectual gift that Mike Montagna is presenting to us. It's huge. It's humongous. It's a new evolution in even the very idea of what we call money.
Well,
Mike, it's such a huge thing. I mean, for me,
if I answer that question truthfully, there's two sides of it. The one is illogical, and that is, I was in college algebra classes when I was in the second grade. I mean, the math is just banal. There's no question of it. So on the one hand, I know that it's truth, and the other hand is, well, in the furtherance of that, I would also have to say that. Anyone who has been through it seems like a person can't claim these kinds of things, but there are ways to prove things, and this is why these categoric faults are so important to understand. That's the whole innovation upon which a proof of solution hinges. But in the end, there's such a conviction of this, and there's such a cost to humanity and myself as well, that no decent person in history who had this whole idea just dawn on them, in the midst of a economics class when they're 16 years old, and they disprove the whole thesis of the lie of economy in a rhetorical question to a teacher, you know. Um,
I know you hit when you told the teacher about this. I know it hit him like a Mack truck.
oh, he
But
turned red in
how
the
did it?
face. He was shocked. He couldn't even
How,
speak.
how did it actually affect you though? I mean, when you realized when the moment of realization, did you sit there thinking, "Holy shit," you know?
I'm sort of a bit of I have a genuine modesty that doesn't allow me um, to do the holy shit thing about when I say but something like this. But many times in my life I get on some kind of a roll like this, and people say, it's. I mean, I just yesterday I had somebody from
I
Canada.
think I've lost you for a second, Mike. Yeah, the connection's breaking on us a little, Mike.
Okay, well,
Okay, I'll
can
have you back again.
okay. Sometimes it queues up, and that's part of the problem. Uh, Somebody just a couple of days ago, reported an incident where someone in Canada had discovered Andrew Mitchell's site, and they turned that person to my pages and to the TNS radio broadcast, and that person had come back to them and actually expressed that they believed that when they heard me speak about these things, that they were it was as if they were hearing the voice of God. And I don't mention that lightly, because there's a whole other further side of this, and I don't know that I can ever.
Well, what I mean, maybe I can help you out a little. What I'm saying is, I know, for example, if I had been a 16-year-old sitting behind a desk in a schoolroom, economics class or math class, whatever, and had this dawned on me at that point, I literally would have. I think I would have had to exclaim out loud, the typical, eureka moment, like, wow, you know, everybody listen up. Uh,
Well, the teacher, had a eureka moment. Most of the kids in the class are, they're asleep, and whatever's going on around them, they have no idea, what its implications were. And although, I mean, eureka moments were sort of, daily life, actually, because I mean, I was in all these advanced mathematics programs where I'm, constantly proving the theses of mathematics and geometry right off the top of my head. And the faculty at the school was aware that I was, I don't like to say brilliant, but that I saw the answers to problems. Just I do. I see them. I have a way of scribbling them out in front of me, and realizing what the answers were. But the real eureka moment was afterward. I mean, realizing the importance of what I had just proven. I had proven that any economy based on interest-bearing debt inevitably fails, but I hadn't realized what the obfuscation of the currency was
That's
in such terms. And and what I do, I don't dream like other people do. I think in my sleep. And
well. Sorry for disturbing you. Well, let me just interrupt you for a second there. In other words, folks, I mean, I just want to stick this in other words for a moment, if you don't mind. There's a process in mathematics, or something in an object, that's a thought object in mathematics known as theorems. So would
yes.
you, like, basically what you did is you solved the theorem. You didn't solve it. You actually produced the theorem for economy, basically.
Right off the top of my head.
Yes. Now that's, folks, new, just so you know, just this is to the listeners, new theorems don't just pop out of nowhere just like that often. It's not a regular occurrence,
Well, to
okay?
give you an example of a mathematic, first of all, people need to understand what a theorem is. A theorem is an idea with a proof. Without the proof, it's a hypothesis or a postulate. It's a completely different thing, which is not recognized. This is a possible explanation for something, is what a
Right.
hypothesis is, or a postulate. But a theorem is actually a formal proof. In other words, it's a thought that has a constructive basis that is conclusive and irrefutable from its very beginning. And so it's the construction of this thought which is important. And just to give you a simple example of something like that is the Pythagorean theorem. That is, that the sum of the squares of the sides of a right triangle equal the square of the hypotenuse. Now, a person in ancient times could mess around, experiment with right triangles until some day after a half a dozen people have been working together on right triangles, they somehow, it seems that if they took the area of the two sides, they it always seemed to equal about the area of the hypotenuse. But there would be no way of knowing that or actually perceiving it even.
Well, what would you
That
say it'd be more accurate to say they could demonstrate it, but they couldn't prove
no,
it?
no,
They
no,
could
no, no, no.
demonstrate
You
that.
can't demonstrate it until you actually can prove it.
Well,
You
that's what I'm
see,
saying. No, well, they
so
could.
it's the same kind of a thing. It's a eureka moment. It isn't until you
Well,
see this.
the 3-4-5 right triangle does it. But
Oh no,
again,
all right triangles do it.
sure, but I mean, the numbers in the 3-4-5 triangle do it very easy and simple, but that's not a theorem. What I'm saying is you can demonstrate it that way, but an actual theorem is more so. This is the point I'm trying to make. It's even more so.
Well, actually, you can't. Yes, if you demonstrated it for a 3-4-5 triangle,
Mhm.
that would only prove the case for a 3-4-5 triangle. The theorem is that the sum of the squares of the two sides, regardless of the
Yeah,
dimensions of a right triangle, equal the square of the hypotenuse.
yeah.
And see, the eureka moment there isn't just that the math. What might happen is you might evaluate the math for a 3-4-5, and so you have the square of 3 is 9, and you have the square of 4 is 16, and you add the 2 and you've got 25. So there's the square of those two sides, but and the square of the hypotenuse, being as the hypotenuse is 5, would be 25. But you don't know, since you've manually constructed this triangle, whether you really truly have a 90-degree angle, although as close as you can measure it, that concurs, it is a fact, and that the sides are actually exactly 3 and exactly 4 and the hypotenuse is exactly 5. You don't know that.
Correct. That's
Those
the
are
point.
unknowns. So the
In other
only
words,
way of knowing them is that they are proven by a theorem. And in order to prove a theorem, it's not a mathematic process. And in all the proofs of the Pythagorean theorem that I've seen in later life don't equate to the one that I produced at the same age, in high school advanced mathematics class, and that was to cite the geometric proof, and which is the only, I would presume it's the only true proof of the theorem. And basically, I just had the teacher draw a right triangle with a short vertical side A and a long vertical or a horizontal side B, and connect draw a hypotenuse across them. And then I had we drew the square of A over the interior of the triangle, and the square of B beneath it, and the square of C over the two, translated that to a parallelogram, which makes it coincide with the square of B, and then I proved that the triangles which belong or don't belong to the area, the sum of all the areas by the laws of congruent angles and supplementary angles, and congruent triangles, side angle side, etc., proved that the areas of the included parts and the areas of the excluded parts made the square of A plus the square of B equal the square of C. And I mean, I basically just did all that right off the top of my head. But that's the kind of mind that I had for mathematics and geometry.
That's the point I'm trying to make here, Mike, that, you didn't just demonstrate. This was the point I'm trying to make. You didn't just demonstrate it by saying, well, here's a 3, 4, 5 triangle, for example, and it looks like this. You've done, with MPE, you've done more than that. And this, I mean, I think this is what I don't think people really appreciate how difficult.
No, they don't. They just jump right in there and think there's got to be something that I haven't done, and there isn't. Literally, there's never a question that's ever fired at me that I haven't answered.
Exactly. Think of how long it took for folks for mankind to do it, folks, to come up with a theorem just for the 3, 4, 5 triangle. And now what I wanted folks to appreciate was the intricacies of the economic model, and Mike has actually done it for that. So, it's of an order of magnitude times 10, I think, more significant than doing the 3, 4, 5 theorem. That's what I'm trying to get across when I was saying that.
Well, right. When I first started writing presidents about this, I mean, I thought about writing Richard Nixon, and I never trusted the guy, and I never did. And then I wrote Gerald Ford, and I didn't even get a return of my receipt. I sent it, return receipt requested, certified delivery, and never even got a receipt. Then when I called the Carter administration, and they asked me to go ahead and submit this proposition of mathematically perfected economy to Jimmy Carter, I sent it the same way, certified delivery, return receipt requested, and I didn't even get a receipt back again. I figured, oh, these bastards, it just, I was getting fried, mad about this, and then I did get my receipt from Carter. It was like 6 months after I sent it, and it usually should come back in 2 weeks. So, but never a word, not a word. Right. And I'm thinking, you scumbags, and so then I wrote Reagan was claiming, all these things were problems, and people said, right, Reagan. So I wrote the Reagan campaign, and I gave him the whole proposition. I proved that Reagan's propositions of reducing taxes 10%, federal taxes 10% per year for 3 years, wouldn't balance the federal budget, nor solve the cause of price inflation. I proved the price inflation is strictly caused by this unwarranted imposition of interest and this obfuscation of our currency, which perpetually multiplied falsified indebtedness. I proved that Reagan would accumulate more federal debt than any president before him, and this is during the beginning of his 1979 campaign. And people within his campaign staff were were enthusiastic about all this, but there were other people higher up who were opposed to it. And there was an actual war within the Reagan campaign, which precipitated into the Reagan administration. Well, about 1982, after I haven't heard from the Reagan people for like 2 years, and I think kiss them off too, and I'm thinking, that the world is full of betrayers. My eyes are open, The world is full of betrayers. All these politicians are betrayers, and they have been. The last good president we had was shot, and killed. But what happened is that good people
Sorry,
with
sorry. Can we, I hate to let that little comment just pass like that. You're talking about JFK there.
sure.
Can you tell me definitively, do you know what JFK's intention was for the economic model? Because I've heard
If you,
so
if
often.
you,
Go
if
on.
you, yes, in fact, a lot of the thought that, people that think that there was much to that precipitates from my work because I included pictures of, the funeral and so on and so forth. And that people have assumed that there is much to that. But the truth of the matter is, and I don't want to get into it too deeply. It's something we could spend a lot of time in. There's no evidence that JFK was about to dissolve the Federal Reserve System, that he understood its improprieties in any way which would have led immediately to solution. See, you don't do that as president. You do that beforehand. You have to be free. You have to be uninhibited and a true critical thinker who will leave no question unasked and unanswered in absolute terms. Until you prepared to present solution, you're not really ready to save the world or a country by mathematically perfected economy. Now, what Kennedy did in the way of resurrecting the silver certificate is one way we could express it, really has no effect whatsoever on the process of perpetual multiplication of falsified indebtedness. Moreover, it makes that perpetual multiplication of falsified indebtedness redeemable in silver, which would allow the banking system, in fact, to become the owners of all this silver. So it really, it at best, and I do think of Kennedy in the best terms. I mean, there's people that criticize him for being a womanizer and all, but and I don't excuse any of the things that he did, but I don't condemn him at all for them either, because in truth, in that day and era, and people, younger people, yourself included, wouldn't understand this as well as I would. It was actually fashionable for every man, especially any attractive man, to be a womanizer, to cheat on his wife. I mean, we don't like to say these things, but those were the facts of the matter, And as far as I'm
Different point.
concerned, I just sweep all that aside, you
Michael,
know.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. I just if you wouldn't mind having a look at your Skype chat there, I've just been copying and pasting something that's been put in the chat box for you.
Okay, I wasn't looking again here. Let me.
Okay, but just your general idea or notions on Kennedy. I mean, there's all these conspiracy theories floating around, not just about the death, okay, not just about
Oh,
his
somebody's put something here confidentially. A word of warning to Mike. The revelation under the Nobel Prize can finally bury his solution. Confidentiality. Which isn't even spelled right. Sorry, you're not an authority on that. The My submission already exists in the hands of many people who will publish it if something happens to me or if it's squelched. Number two, the rules of the prize are that you can publish it as soon as the winner is announced, which is to be in the early part of March.
Yeah,
It
I think
says
Mike,
they can get
make it.
ownership of all submissions and then he cannot reveal it to the world. That's bullshit. I've been doing this for 44 years. They can't stop it. It's already happened. So
Yeah.
forget about it. Even a bullet won't stop this from happening.
Look, I wanted you to respond to that. I mean, look, the
Well,
guy.
and then he goes on, when under these competitions, the rules give them ownership of all submissions. You haven't even read the rules. This is just the kind of bullshit that it's just a distraction. Go to the goddamn pages and read the rules. Then tell me about it.
Well, that's what we're
And then if this person is all wrapped up in that's stupid. It's already out. I've already published it. This is just
look,
again.
they can't, even if they bind and gag, as you say, and even put a bullet in your head. Well, hey, they can't gag me. They can't gag many other people across the world.
That's the truth of the matter. There's many people as you have who've.
Well, I think Ware was just expressing his concern there. I mean, he's a good guy. Ware one. I mean, I think it was just a concern. He was just worried. So,
let's quit all being so timid and concerned about it. I mean, sure, great, be concerned, but excuse me, it's like describing the sky as falling because it's raining. That's not bad. It's good. Water, we need it. It's this is a war. What's going on here actually is an incredible thing. Here, they are going to have to accept a submission which is going to invalidate, once again, as I have been doing for 44 years, is going to invalidate the whole pseudoscience of economics, a purported science which is wholly without one proof of a single theorem and can only be wholly bereft of proof and theorem because it's all based on this lie, this obfuscation of the currency. This is being submitted to them. Again, proof of it, formal proof of it. If they do not award the prize as the solution for the European Union, they're registering to eternity that they did so. This is something that's even going to make the worst of them think, oh, do we give up now? Or do we try and carry this on until the battle escalates and the next thing that they're doing is hanging bankers from every tree on the street? This is a ripe opportunity to hold them accountable, to give them an opportunity to join the human race and be right and gracious with the rest of us. In fact, I could read you the last two sentences of my submission as a statement. I'll make it the last three. It is indeed then the eternal object and potential power of betrayers to deny justice. But in the end, it is the whole of humanity which must determine the only facts and means of monetary justice. For nothing less can even ensure peace descends from just, ever consensual interaction. Humanity, therefore, is not merely asking for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. We are declaring both are our only way. In other words, I'm not taking no for an answer, and if you are of right mind, neither will you.
Hear to that. Amen. I mean, I've told you, Mike. I mean, I'll say it, and I've said it again. I'll say it on air, folks. And I've said this to Mike. I'm sure he'll confirm this for you. I've said it to him that if anything happens to Mike Montagna, I'm going to bloody well make sure MPE gets out there. This is not stopping. It is essential. It's not just a nice cutesy idea, folks. Oh, look, Mike solved the financial system for the planet. No, it's essential. It's essential for us to move on as a species. It's an absolute requirement. This is as necessary as air, folks.
Yep.
That's how important this is.
It governs all of our interaction. And worse than that, so long as we allow any subversion of this at all, it subverts all of our political processes, because in order to persist in all of this injustice, they have to usurp representative process. They have to deny us absolute consensual representation. It's the reason for all the political corruption in the world as well. When you take away the possibility of gain from the economic system, then and then alone can you fix government as well.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, sometimes when I'm sitting down in my quiet moments that occasionally I have, I like to, usually when I'm taking a break between books, I tend to read 4 or 5 books at the same time, but usually when I hit a break between, selecting my next 4 or 5, um, I usually take a little time to just kind of let all the information soak in and filter through. And then I kind of sit and have a quiet time and I think, okay, what's next? Where do I need to look next? Where do I need to go next? And ever since after I read Mathematically Perfect Economy and I went through all the math and I went through all the pages and I went through all the information, and again, this was before I got in touch with you, I knew before I got in touch with you that I mean, I was absolutely 100% positive that I'd found the man who found the answer. There was no doubt in my mind, none. Because
there's actually a proven trail that of all the plagiarists and their faults expose the fact that they could not have come up with the answer. Ellen Hodgson Brown, for instance, advocated spending the interest back into circulation. Well, you would never do that if you had originally discovered that the interest wasn't even justified.
Pointless. Give me a reason for it. It's pointless.
Right.
It's absolutely
pointless. It's actually one of the stupidest things that I've ever heard in my life.
Oh, it's great. I don't even know why. I mean, does she ever actually try to offer a logical explanation for why she puts that out there?
She of course tries to justify it, but she can't articulate the causes that she's solving. Even I've never seen her succeed in it. In fact, no one else has articulated the causes. I mean, I haven't tested you, and I would assume that you can. But all these people who are purporting to be authorities, actually what happened in every case, they crossed my web pages. Most of them read my Parable of Perfect Economy, which has caused grown people to weep, and were convinced that they suddenly had understood all this and they were the one to speak it to the world, and then they screwed the whole thing up. Jacques Jacoran wrote me a year before he did his debt virus, and he begins the first page with pretending to be a historical authority, citing this, giving the same story in the most childish, broken down rendition of it, which loses all its principles, as if he discovered it in history. And it doesn't even exist in history. It's a story in which Mike Montagna speaks through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. And Ellen Hodgson Brown did it, and so many of these other, there are literally millions of web pages which plagiarize that story as if it's history, and it is a story.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, Carl from Canada just put on the chat box there, this from Ellen Hodgkin Brown, that interest is required to cover the defaults as one of the ideas she offers. Now,
she
again,
couldn't prove that.
Well, again, it's bonkers. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, I know I'm laughing. That doesn't make sense. Because she can't quantify.
Because it causes the defaults. B,
exactly. You still have to keep interest going in the system. So it's a never-ending. It's another never.
Well, that wouldn't happen if you spin it into circulation. She says, Okay, why would you do that?
Yeah, I can't think of I can't think of a reason for it.
And I'm sorry. When I hear that woman speak, it just irritates me to such.
Correct. I correct myself. I can, if you want to support a group of people who want to stay in control of everybody else's lives, then there's a reason. But if that's not your reason, then there is no reason.
Yeah, but Ellen is, despite the fact that she's a statist, that she doesn't understand how government works or needs to work in order to serve the people, that she's just dreaming that there's some other way to do this, even though she didn't discover the problem. She pretends to. She calls it a Ponzi scheme, which no person who discovered the problem would call it a Ponzi scheme. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I've yet to find the person who can explain to me how Ponzi scheme equates the obfuscation of the currency. And another thing about her, she's just as phony gets. And believe me, I'm being polite when I say this. I mean, she disgusts me like I can't tell you. But to say that the problem exists because, and she doesn't even identify the problem, but it exists because the interest isn't published with the principal. You can't even say that unless you identify the problem in the terms that I've expressed it, which are the only terms that express it. You see?
Thank you. Very simple line. In fact, I was waiting for something like that. There's a simple line, folks, to the listener. This is, go ring up any economist or a professor of economics in any university or somebody who's attending or a student of economics and ask them, put that to them. Ask them, what is the problem? They can't even tell you what the problem is.
And here's another thing. Why are all these people advocating spending money into circulation? It's a brilliant solution that Mike Montaigne gave through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin, that all these pretended authorities think is actual history so they can say it themselves. And they never mention where they got the idea. They all know they're wrong, and what are they doing? Dividing the union that we would have otherwise. And I mean, just a couple of days ago, I was interviewed to go on, I'm going to give the guy's name, hell with these people, Peter A. Bear. He's going to publish a book, Death by Banking. He interviewed me about 6 months ago. Never even broadcast the interview. All right, because he had such exception with it. Evidently, Patty Walking Turtle straightened him out about it. He became a believer in the background, and in those few months, he's written a book, Death by Banking, and he just apprised me of it a couple of days ago.
And
not only did he not identify the problem, he's going to pretend to be some kind of authority. You wait when the book comes out, Death by Banking, And where did he get this idea from?
Yeah. Let me guess.
Well, people don't have any goddamn idea about all this stuff. I mean, Steven Zarlinga comes out with his book, Lost Science of Money, and then he asked me, as soon as he released it, he asked me to help him promote it. He was just like I was on an email list or something, and he forgot who he stole from. I said, Lost Science. Where did you find any evidence of a science that existed before mine? If you differ from what I propose, how can you disprove mathematically? Pardon?
They're not economic. I mean, they're not. Look, it's like the people who call law. They call it social science, right? The study of law and the operation of legality. They call it the social sciences. It's not a flippant science. It's a philosophy. And what these so-called economists are putting out at the moment are philosophies. You're the only one who has actually turned it into a science. You have a formal theorem, a proof. You're the one who's turned it into a science, not them.
Well, I can tell you why he thought it was a lost science. Because he plagiarized my Parable of Perfect Economy as well, not even being a credible researcher, never finding any evidence of it in history, and yet presuming it happened when in fact the lost science was the present innovation of mathematically perfected economy issued through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin by Mike Montaigne in my 1975 Parable of Perfect Economy. He crossed my own work, then pretends to have discovered it, to differ from me, to claim credit for it and authority, not even knowing where it came from, to the very person he's stealing from it without even realizing it. I mean, excuse me, but what a freaking idiot.
just want to make a response to some of the guys there in the chat box, some of the things they've been putting out. So basically, I've been typing away in the chat. I don't know actually if you're booked into if you're on the chat
No,
box
no,
at the
no. I
moment.
don't dare watch all that because some bullshit will happen
Oh, you've
that'll
been
piss
getting
me
good stuff
off.
coming up tonight. Well, just again, I need to respond to the guys here. So I'm putting it out there that uh, uh, who's twisting it and who's this day and who are these so-called philosophers? These who's the they I'm talking about? I'm talking about every other so-called economist out there, folks. They are not dealing with science, the science of economy. They're not. They're
There,
philosophizing
there isn't a
about
book I can pick up from these
right.
people that almost every sentence I can't invalidate.
I tell you, Mike, we're getting fired up here.
Well, no,
I
it's the
was
truth. I bought. I won't even buy these people's works, but other people sent them to me. And I mean, Ellen Hodgson Brown pretended to discover my parable of perfect economy in history. How phony can you get? I mean, come on. I mean, people don't get it. They want to think, oh, these people are so nice. They exposed all this stuff to us. I thank them for their work. It's their stealings you're thanking them from, and they obfuscated their stealings into something which isn't solution. So that's what you're really thanking them from. And what have they done? They profited for themselves while 12-year-old girls are getting raped on the streets of Los Angeles because they don't have a home anymore. You know?
yeah. I mean, look, folks, this is. I mean, Mike, you brutally brought everybody right down to earth there because that's what's happening, folks. That's look. Why do you think the children are being killed in foreign wars? It's not about the oil, folks. It's about control of the. They need control of this monetary, so-called monetary system. The only thing they can do at the moment, it's like the Mongol Empire, they have to keep expanding. They call it growth. Their system requires perpetual growth, which of course is impossible. It's impossible. Now, why would you base your monetary system, even try it in your own family, try and, you know, set up a situation, a hypothetical situation where every day you have to do times what you did yesterday times 1.5. And before you know it, it becomes impossible. And if you increase or decrease as a times 1.25, 1.01, that's all that depends. The only thing that would changes is how far into the future you put the crash where it becomes physically impossible to do what you're attempting to do. That's all these guys are doing. They're pushing all this so-called debt onto your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. And we've been taking it up to you-know-what from our parents and their parents.
Well, we can't even survive it another generation's worth. We're in for terminal failure now, and
I can't bear the thought of another family being removed from their shelter, their home. I don't call them properties anymore. I don't call them, apartments. It's their home, folks. It's their home.
yeah, and another thing to think about is that it's the production of the people that the people are being dispossessed of by a few people who produce nothing. And
Yeah.
this is how they come to own the oil and medicine and drugs and water supplies and electric utilities and all the things in the world go awry because they're directed by people of this bent.
Yeah.
I said, there's a sentence in these books that I can invalidate. Just to make things quick, I bought a copy of G. Edward Griffin's, the second look at the Federal Reserve, and just going back to the appendix, Natural Laws of Human Behavior in Economics. This is the title of this appendix. Natural Law number 1, first sentence. Lesson: when gold or silver, in parentheses, is this. Why did you pick those two elements? Why, if the one is the one, did you suddenly decide to include the second in parentheses? When gold or silver is used as money, And when the forces of supply and demand are not thwarted by government intervention, is how does government intervention thwart the laws of supply and demand? I'm speechless. What I've just read so far, I'm speechless that any, excuse my language, bastage would publish this crap, you know. When gold or silver is used as money and when the forces of supply and demand are not thwarted by government intervention, the amount of new metal added to the money supply will always be closely proportional to the expanding services and goods which can be purchased with it. What in the hell makes that happen?
No. Yeah, crock.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's natural law number one, and the rest is based on this. Okay, and what does he make the law as a result of this? Purported observation, which of course isn't even true. Long-term price stability is possible only when the money supply is based upon the gold or silver supply without government interference. That's just nothing but your own personal delusion. In part because all your friends own gold and silver because they're hoping to make out like bandits at the cost of the rest of us.
Yeah, look, folks, people. I mean, I know people intrinsically know this, Mike. They do. Everybody knows it.
Yeah, but that's how ridiculous these people are. That isn't even close to science.
No. That, I won't allow anybody call it science in my presence. I'll be on them like a rash. You know, no way. Doesn't meet the definition. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow you to call it something. No more than I'd allow somebody.
But you know what we need to do? We need when these people speak before us or whatever, we need to stand up and challenge them and take each one of these people out of the picture. How long are we going to allow Ron Paul to say money is created out of thin air?
No, it's not created out of thin air.
You bet your bippy it isn't. You know, and I mean, for crying out loud, people who think in those terms, which is non-thinking,
and here's the thing,
deny us of any way to solve our problems, because the only way to solve our problems is to unequivocally determine what is there and what is awry, and that means you don't call it a Ponzi scheme. It's an obfuscation of the currency.
I don't know if you heard the interview. Well, it was a phone call that Pondman, Ripples from the Pond, Dave Pondman, did with it was some guy in the Bank of England he was talking to, and here's how little the guy in the Bank of England knew, folks. He even told Pondman, "Oh, we created out of thin air, essentially," and that's just not correct.
Right.
It's not correct. And so even the bankers don't know. And you see, this is what I say, Mike, as well. And I know this is difficult for people. I do. I mean, I don't want to see again, I don't see bankers, I just see men and women. I don't want to see men and women who used to act and work as bankers hanging from lampposts and say, I don't want to see that.
No, nor do I. And that's part of this. You know, this is why this Wolfson submission is, you know, it's done as a gentleman would do it, you know, but it's appealing to the heart, to rip the heart out, show it to the banker. You do have a heart. You know, and you do have to recognize that you have a heart, because unless you do, you know, I mean, maybe someday we can't save you from the fate you deserve. You know, wake up. You know, come with us. Do this. Allow us. Let's just do this now. And I mean, this whole submission is I should read the first sentence of it. You'll love this. This is the first sentence. This is to bankers. This is the bankers. Excuse me as I scroll up to this. This is just the non-technical summary. First sentence of the non-technical summary, which has to be under 1,000 words. Particularly as crucial activities of the purported European Union, I'm saying it's not even a union, are routinely insulated from comprehensive public assent. It is not clear how a prevailing recommendation of this committee can promise to meet perpetual requisites of inherently sovereign nations and people, unless all of us are willing to establish every necessary public means to prevent the like of present malfeasance.
Well, again, I keep coming back to the turning of the seal. And I keep saying to people, listen to what Billy Maguire says, which, believe it or not, is the same message Mike Montagna is putting out to you right now, folks. It's your choice. You decide. You choose. You can choose mathematically perfected economy. You can be sovereign, but you have to choose it. Mike, you can't force this on people, right?
No. In fact, it's totally voluntary. And only by signing a mandate for it do you ever, do you perpetually, and what the structure of the mandate is that you've taught your son about mathematically perfected economy, for instance. All right.
Yeah.
So at some point,
Now all my 4 children now understand. And well, I'll tell you, my main point to explain to them was war. I told them this will eradicate the very idea of war.
right? All war,
Significant this is.
all war rises from property disputes over resources, whatever the case may be. And until we have a means for achieving justice over property disputes, we don't really have a way of preventing war, or at least the friction that causes war. Mathematically perfected economy resolves those issues. So, for instance, Australia is being sustained right now by selling its natural resources. Well, this gives the illusion of prosperity that people, can receive incomes for very little, if any, production at all. I mean, it's possible that no production could be sustainable so long as these resources are sold. But what's happening is the income from the resources distributed however it is amongst the people is disappearing from circulation, has to be bought back into circulation by further indebtedness, which escalates the cost of sustaining this delusion that you can sustain yourself by simply selling your resources forever. Eventually, they're gone, you have no industry, and you have terminal indebtedness, and you're up the same creek that every other country in the world is up. Australia has to wake up, and I mean, thanks to Dave Ardren there in Australia, Australia will wake up. But we have to recognize the ramifications of our actions,
Well, again, Mike, sorry for interrupting. Again, I just need to make this clear as well. I mean, part of my explanation to the children, my children, when I was explaining this, I said, listen, when the big banker types go into a foreign country, they don't go to the peaceful inhabitants of the land to set up. First people they approach are the ruthless warlords. They're the first guys the bankers approach, folks, to get their central bank system in place.
Yep.
And then they get those guys to run phony, fake elections at the point of a gun, and then they get to announce to the world, see, the people chose this.
Yeah, and it's always on the basis of lies. The truth of the matter is, as we've said many times on TNS programs, the Federal Reserve System was imposed upon the United States here in betrayal of political promises of the 1912 Democrat Party platform, which promised not to create a central bank. As soon as the Democrats were elected for that promise, the authors of the Aldrich Bill, which was a proposition for a central bank, were immediately, amidst the Wilson administration, rewriting the Aldrich Bill into, they renamed it the Federal Reserve Act, I mean, call it something else. It's neither federal nor reserve of anything, and Bill Stills has plagiarized those words of Mike Montana to make himself famous in these videos that he's produced that, even as he runs for president, it's always in front of a shelf of all these videos for sale. And he refuses to debate me on American Underground Network radio and TV.
He can't. Look, to be honest with you, he'd be mad in the head too, because he may as well go and take up a new trade if he does, Mike.
Well, that's true, but it proves that he knows what a phony bastard he is, because he won't come to the table with a person he's been ripping off to pretend he's an authority to give the wrong answer that an authority wouldn't give. 100% reserves, back it all by gold. I mean, we just read from G. Edward Griffin, who would side with Still and is a friend of his and was in the first video, produced by a bunch of characters who don't even recognize the problem, the cause of the problem or the problem itself, and yet pretended to be authorities and calling themselves money masters of all things,
the chat box here, they're basically saying, who do we owe all this money to? And the truth be known, folks, in reality, it doesn't actually matter. Once you decide to shift into MPE, you don't have to worry about who the so-called money may or may not have been owed to. It's no longer relevant, because it was never really truly relevant.
To answer that question just completely unequivocally, the money isn't owed to anyone because, as we've proven, a debt doesn't exist to the banking system, because it was even possible for the banking system even to give up so much property as would have comprised commensurable lawful consideration to the debts it falsifies to itself. This is, these are not careless words. When I say falsifies to itself, I mean that. It's already been proven. No one, the banking system, won't even contest it, because if it went to court, it could only fall in our favor. They don't want this to go to court. You see, they would rather it get ignored, like Obama's, appeals to appear in court over his falsification of a birth certificate. You can't go to court.
Obama don't care whether it's a falsified birth certificate or not, folks. Get it through your head. They don't care. They're just happy everybody is scurrying around worrying about that.
They're going to just shine it on until we bring it to court. And until we bring it to court, enforce it in the courts of law, which is going to be by handing over these pieces of papers, resolving our debts. Well, if you've got a right to do it, no private citizen can be denied the rights of any other private citizen. We are republics. You see? And so, all right, well, if that's the case, then here's a piece of paper that says I provided you an irredeemable promise to pay likewise in satisfaction of my debts. But what are these debts? They're not debts. We have to understand this. This is not just a nuance of terms. It's not just nomenclature or something like that. Our debts are not debts. They're obligations to pay for property as we consume of it, which have to retire the principal from circulation. This is how we maintain this perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation to pay just so much for that property, which is the only set of principles which can persist in an immutable currency, which is indispensable to the immutability of the contracts that we're actually using for circulation. So the debts are not owed as debts. They are not debts. They are obligations to pay for property as we consume of that property, which retires principal from circulation. They are not owed to anyone in specifically. They are an obligation which retires principal from circulation, which is a commitment which is indispensable to the value of the money. In other words, a promissory obligation only has value so long as it hasn't been paid and represents an obligation to collect the payment. As soon as the payment has been made, that obligation to that right to collect the payment, a thing of value produced by that person, no longer exists, and they're defunct. They're null and void. Promissory obligations represent nothing at all once they've been paid, except the fact that they've been paid. You see, they're no longer as value, and
No,
we have to understand that, because in regular trade we do this. It sounds more complicated than it is when we just explain it. It's just simple. I produce in my Parable of Perfect Economy, which we've read at least twice on the air. We have a producer of fowl and a producer of feed, and they just say, okay, I'm the producer of fowl, and I say to you, Vin, that you grow feed, and I'm going to double my production next year, and I produced all the facilities, and I've got my breeding stock all ready to go. But I have been growing my feed, and I need someone else to do it because I don't have further suitable property, or whatever the reasons. I want to concentrate on just breeding the birds or whatever. So would you produce so much feed for so much of my production? And you have to think about, well, is Mike actually going to do that? Is Mike full of bull, or is he a real guy who produces things? And you decided,
you have to assess it.
Right, and that's what creditworthiness is. Is Mike going to do this? And once you do that, you decide, in favor, for instance, for whatever the factors, and you say,
history, past record. I've heard other people. I've checked you out. Yes, they've said he's good, he's reliable, he's a sound investment. So I invest in Mike's promise. Me.
And here's another thing you could do. You could say, well, Mike, you've got this barn on the edge of your property, which abuts my property. Suppose you don't pay me. Would you be willing to pledge that barn, which I could use to store my feed in, if you fail to pay me? And I said, well, sure.
Yep.
So there you are. So
here, but I need to clarify this, Mike. What Mike is talking about, folks, is it's when it hits a courtroom. I deal, and Mr. T, we've spoken about this, that what actually happens in the courtroom is there's a trick that's pulled on you in the courtroom, which prevents what Mike is talking about getting into the record, because there's a different process going on in the courts that most people are unaware of.
And when we understand that process, we prevail. And here's what's happening. Let's finish this promissory obligation thing first of all. I issue you a promissory obligation to deliver you whatever. Let's just say it's 2,000 chickens over the course of a year or whatever, and you've got a promissory obligation from Mike. So you go to the mercantile store or whatever, and you say, well, I've got a promissory obligation from Mike Montana to deliver 2,000 chickens. Would you take 100 chickens for this, that, and the other thing that I'm going to take from you today? And they say, yes, they will. So you write a promissory obligation against those chickens, and when the mercantile store collects on the chickens from me, the promissory obligation is null and void. It's been fulfilled. It no longer represents 100 chickens.
They've got the chickens or whatever,
right.
And it's gone now.
And so what's happening in the courtroom and what's happening in the laws and the malfeasance of government is some other guy that neither Vin or I or any of you know. Okay, some guy who's going to name himself Buddy, but he's not our friend at all. And Buddy goes around and he says, Mike, Vin, I understand you issued a promissory obligation. Can't do that. Why not, Buddy? Government doesn't deny it's the right to do that. Oh, yes, it did. Oh, yes, it did. All promissory obligations have to be issued on my paper. I'm Buddy. I'm your friend. I'm the federal private entity.
Claim you're an employee of the government, folks. That's the trick.
No, you're not we're not the employee of the government. We're the bank. And we're pretending to be a federal entity by the name federal, but we're not federal at all. We're 12 private corporations, and we're not a reserve of anything. So we're not a Federal Reserve at all. That's just what we named ourselves. But we come in to the equation. We say, Mike and Vin, you can't issue your promissory obligations on your paper. They have to be issued on our paper. And so here's the piece of paper, Vin. Now, Mike, you owe us the 2,000 chickens.
Plus interest.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to add. Yeah, plus, to pay those 2,000 chickens, we've arranged the paper in such a way that as you pay the 2,000 chickens plus interest out of circulation, you have to produce the 3,000 chicken resultant debt in the subsequent period. And then that's multiplied into 4,500 chicken, debt in the subsequent period. And that's what you're going to pay next year, just to continue servicing the initial falsified obligation that we created. That's what's happening to you. And this is why you're being dispossessed into oblivion.
If you don't, apparently you become a criminal, and they get to dispossess you of all your property.
Sure,
And
they
they
call you a criminal when they settle a 20,000 chicken per year debt on you, and you can no longer produce that much.
look, a 5-year-old child gets this, folks. Before they end up going to school and get polluted, they understand it. If you take your time, talk to a 5-year-old child, they'll tell you.
your your 5-year-old can probably explain it to him when you see his his expressions, his consternation when you try and tell him how it works. You're going to see that it's built into all of us. We all know better, and I mean, whatever compromisations we made, there's no excuse for them along the way. I mean, I have people tell me all the time it's the chemicals they're putting in our water or whatever. I say, well, how come it's not doing it to me?
Right. Well, look, here's what I'd say. Um, let's say, for example, somebody's been listening tonight, Mike, and they still haven't grasped the concept, okay?
You do have an audience?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Oh, we do. And they're full of comments. But what I'm saying is, let's imagine, for example, somebody's listening tonight and they're new to this, brand new, first time tuning in, or maybe they've tuned in halfway through, whatever, and they're thinking, okay, something sounds interesting here, but I don't quite get it. Maybe they've tuned in halfway. Here's what I'd say to you. Just find somebody who's
Try
willing.
tuning in all the way.
Try finding somebody and sit down with them and try to explain the actual system as it stands to somebody. Just even try to do it. If trying to explain the existing system to somebody will actually drop the pennies in your own mind, and maybe sit down and try and draw it out, explain it to yourself.
It will, and if you're a hopeless case, you'll just think that you've explained it. That we borrow money from banks. I mean, people have said this to me for most of the 44 years. Today, that's died away because most of your monetary reformists just accept, for some reason, that we have to eradicate interest. It's become commonly accepted idea that we have to eradicate banking. It's a stupidity that we have to eradicate money. In fact, the biblical source of the idea is not that money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money. Completely different thing. And of course, a money which only represents your rightful entitlement to the pool of wealth for what you've contributed to it is no offense against you whatsoever. It's your only protection. You see? So, and if you want to forfeit that because you're already so evolved that you wouldn't take from the pool of wealth more than you contributed to it, then the money of mathematically perfected economy can impose no injustice or encumbrance upon you whatsoever. So you have no legitimate complaint against money. The problem is you don't understand how to do money right. These people who say money is created out of thin air, just, I mean, if you settle for something that doesn't explain it, you can never understand. And what probably is a dead, if not dying art, is critical thinking, and that is you start at the beginning and you just build the whole thing up from its fundamental elements, analyzing it and understanding how they work together. I mean,
Got it? A blank sheet of paper, folks.
yeah. And draw a circle on that piece of paper, and that's your circulation. Draw another circle just like it, and that's what they call the debt. Put a P in it. D and a P. D is the debt, P is the principal. And then take from the circulation and pay some principal and interest out of circulation.
Take a slice out of the pie. Do it like a pie chart even. Take a slice out of the pie.
Yep. And I mean, I do that before audiences, and the whole place just starts fidgeting in their seat, and they see where it's going right away, and they realize, holy shit, they all thought something else, and I'm full of crap, and then I'm up there and I diagram it out for them, and they go, holy crap, he's absolutely right, and it's just a fact.
Fraud in MPE. I mean, I was going to do, as you know, I was going to try to get to do a demonstration this year. I was actually going to do a physical demonstration this year. I was going to try and set up with 100 people to do an actual demonstration of MPE in operation. I was going, as people coming in through the door, I was going to say, okay, you're a farmer. Here, this represents your 5 acres. This represents your production for the year. This represents your requirements for the year. Next, okay, you're Mary. You're a dental assistant. This represents your production. This represents your requirements. This, so forth and so on. And in the mix, I was also going to put somebody whose sole function was to attempt to commit as much fraud as possible in the system to show everybody how a fraudster would become apparent in no time, almost no time at all, and the people would have a method of dealing with them.
Well, yeah, especially if you do this common monetary infrastructure, which would mean that any political officer who is taking money on the sly, there's an absolute audit trail of it. It's like you could have software that would raise a red flag. You wouldn't not one piece of physical evidence could exist anywhere that this politician was corrupt, and you could have software that would raise a red flag that this guy got something for nothing. Bingo! Where did it come from? Oh, this drug company, and he just passed this law that makes this unproven drug accepted, and now all these people are getting brain tumors from it, and
but it's
whatever.
fine. Don't worry. There's nothing wrong. It's fine.
Yeah.
In fact, inject it into your eyeballs next.
Yeah, and this mandate makes all that treason.
Somebody, Christina,
I
just put
wouldn't
up.
dare, attempt
Well,
to.
here's a comment I think you'll enjoy. Christina put up in the chat box there. Make a board game, Vin, educational and fun. The board game already exists. It's called Monopoly.
Right.
Play Monopoly, folks.
And there's a funny story behind that, because that's another thing. It's funny how my life went. But when I was a kid, a rainy day in the neighborhood, a few of us kids would get together and play Monopoly at one kid's or another kid's house, and sometimes the game would go on for the whole weekend or whatever. And the funny thing about it is that I understood the principles and was lucky enough, but I never lost. I always won the Monopoly game. But once the other players would get into such a bad state, I would start loaning them money, so that they could play for it. I could earn the money from them. But of course, we all quit playing Monopoly because it was just it's just a disgusting concept once you understand it, and there's really no point in all of it. You just buy to have monetary clout, to dispossess others, and if it's under a system where there is a banking system and the money is subject to interest, you're all working ever harder to feed that until you all go under. The game is over, and Monopoly is a game, and people have suggested that I create a game, mathematically perfected economy. I mean, for so long. I mean, back in the 1970s, people were always, suggesting this even. And I mean, I've always told people, and there's people even on Facebook who have promised, 6 months ago to go ahead and invent a game. They're teachers. The one person I'm thinking of, lady, and she intended to do this, and I haven't heard anything about it since. But, my personal opinion is this is how boring. Because you have the one system that can only is terminal, as Monopoly is, and even without interest, it's terminal. And then you have a system that just goes on without missing a beat. And what's the interest of that? There's no strategy against it, There's no reason to spend your life collecting money just to survive. You can enjoy what you have. Go fishing, Go sit on a hill somewhere, breathe, relax, Quit watching all the crap on TV. Get outside, throw a football around, Don't come home from work so tired you crash and you get a beer, and next thing you know you're half.
When the hell did people think that was the good life? I don't get it.
Well, beer is good, and one of the things that I
I
can quote Benjamin Franklin on is,
I mean, see, this is something. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I really thoroughly enjoyed my work. When I was working building, I loved it. I didn't mind if I came home absolutely shattered, if I felt I did a good job. I enjoyed it, working with wood, building, constructing, overcoming all the problems and difficulties.
developing methods, and
I absolutely loved it. I did. I loved it. And I often said to people, if I won the lotto, I'd still do this for nothing. That's how much I enjoyed what I did.
Hmm.
Uh, however, um, you know, as I've told people on air here many, many times, I saw the big boom coming. So I shut down shop basically. I had to withdraw because I knew I had an option, and my options were very simple: lose everything I had potentially built up for myself based on my actual physical effort, lose all that, and possibly lose everything, even the few sticks over my head, protecting me from the elements. Um, lose all that, or because I would have had to just pump it in, the business would have become a black hole. And I know so many people, they really struggle to try and keep their businesses going, Mike. They really did. I mean, over America, all over America, Europe, Ireland, there are dead spots now in towns. There's dead zones. There's ghost towns appearing where they shouldn't be ghost towns. The
Oh
people
yeah, if
live.
you listen to the news of the
Oh,
politicians, you in Europe might think that America is prospering now, where we really only have about 10% unemployment. Guarantee you it's 25%. Guarantee you, which puts it over what the Great Depression was. You know,
and let's face it, back in the days of the Great Depression, Mike, the population that lived on the land that actually knew how to grow their own food and sustain themselves, the percentage compared to then, what it is now, is completely reversed. As in, the amount of people in cities was one figure, and the amount of people on the land was another. That's now flipped. So, and people starved to death in the Great Depression.
oh, right and left.
Oh, well, now that the
And not
numbers.
only that, they developed all kinds of. I mean, I've read some stories that are just they're tear jerkers. How uh, this one author describes, for instance, observing a man who he was threadbare. His clothes were literally falling off of him, and he's an elder fellow that worked all of his life, and he's been waiting in lines to work for years without any reward, and he's down to skin and bones, and there he is. He's just standing on a street corner, and he's not communicating with anybody. He's just in his own state, and his hands are busily going through some motion, which evidently was something that he'd been doing long, long, long ago when he was working. But his soul, which is like the last thing alive in the guy, his eyes were vacant sockets, and his hands yet are going through these busy ramifications as if he's performing some manual task over and over and over again for want of work. That's all that's left of this man is he standing on a street corner going through the motions of working without a job.
Wow. Well, look, it happened in Ireland, as you know, Mike. People called it the so-called famine. It wasn't. There was no famine in Ireland, folks, and yet there's food, abundant food, and natural resources all around, as there was in the time of the Great Depression in America. So why did the people starve? They starved for lack of knowledge.
Exactly.
They forgot. They took one step too far away from the link they had with nature.
Hmm.
And
That's
they,
why I quote Edith Hamilton in my in my Skype handle. It says when responsibility was the when freedom from responsibility was the freedom they desired most, then Athens ceased to be free and never was free again.
yeah, no, I don't want freedom from responsibility. That's why on the Hill of Tara, what I did, I went up to the Hill of Tara, and when I stepped forward, I was barefoot. I felt it was important that my connection was to the soil, to the earth, and I placed my hand on the ancient stone, the Leah Fall, on the Hill of Tara, the ancient Hill of Tara in Ireland, and I accepted full responsibility, folks, for everything, good and bad, the whole lot, the whole enchilada, as they say. That's what put me in the position where I'm in now. In my
That's a
mind,
really spiritual thing to do.
yeah, I had to do it, Mike. I had to say, okay, I can't pass this responsibility to somebody else because A, it's not their responsibility, and B, if I pass it to somebody else, then I'm not accepting responsibility, where then I'm part of the problem.
Right.
So, right, I'm going to accept full responsibility for everything, good and bad. And every night before I actually hit the hay, I do actually have a little sit down. And I think some people might call it praying. I don't. I have a little sit before I get into my bed, and I just think of all the people who, the men, women, and children who died needlessly in pain, uh, you know, for no good reason. And I accept responsibility for that. I also accept responsibility for the joy that's out there too, and I try and balance the two before I put my head down. That and that
Hmm.
I do.
Well, that's the thing that, gives me joy now, although the work's far from finished. We just might be turning the corner on it, but I see it's going to happen now. I mean, we hear all the negativity still. People don't understand that we can force the future to be our future. They think that despite the fact that there's all of us, it's somehow we just have to depend on those few who are our betrayers, somehow that it will never happen. And that, in truth, is a ridiculous thought. American, a lot of people in Europe might not really be as familiar. Not that Americans are so familiar with their own history that they're so familiar, but our form of government here was tremendously inspired by Native Americans. And Native Americans had some incredibly I was going to say incredibly potent. I want to correct myself. Absolutely indispensable principles of honor. You are no good if you ever compromised your honor. You might as well take yourself out of the picture in Native American society. And that is a very important principle to restore because the lack of honor is what allows us to think we should betray each other. In fact, what we've really adopted is a way of thinking that we're in constant betrayal of each other. You know,
Well, look at the
it,
politicians. Like, who doesn't think? Who listening tonight doesn't think? If a man gives you his word to you, he's going to do something, and he doesn't do it, and you know he was capable. I mean, okay, if he came across a cropper for some reason, you can forgive him. You say, fine, look, I see you came across a copper. I'm not expecting cropper. I'm not expecting you to uphold that part of the bargain, because I can see you had a bad time. But who here would think if a man genuinely gave him his word to you to do or not to do something for you, and he failed to do so, and you knew he still could have done it, he could have performed, he just didn't bother. Who here is going to deal with that man again? You're going to think, well, his word is no good, ergo, he's no good.
right. And
He's
that
no
and
good.
and that is the truth. I mean, the person can redeem themselves somehow, but digging out of that hole is a long, hard road to hoe, and rightfully so, because a society can't afford to be betrayed. And in fact, it becomes incumbent upon us to spread the word of a person's dishonor. And if we all did this, we wouldn't be subject to the betrayal, malfeasance that we are. But I was getting at another point of indispensable to government, which was a Native American principle, and that is they had a council, and it was largely men, uh, and they weren't really elected. It was uh, a, a situation where you could say it was just joint government, you know. And the thing is, though, that any resolution that came out of a council had to be unanimous. And there's a very important thing. We think that, a majority should rule. And that is one of the greatest faults of our implementation of the Republican form of government, which is not democracy. and rightfully
No.
so. But we need to understand the difference and quit using that wrong term for it. We are
Problem
not
is,
democracies.
it's a democratic process. It's a democratic process, folks, but it's not democracy.
Right.
People
Uh,
really are clear, Mike.
yeah, and I mean, I just cringe every time that somebody like Barack Obama proudly boasts that we're a democracy. I mean, what a fool. But this idea of unanimous decision is really important because it does many things. People think, oh, well, how would we ever do anything? Well, yeah, we. Why? How would we? That's why I, got so pissed off at that, poster. My last, regular broadcast was because, that's why we can't accomplish anything. We allow idiots to prevail over us. What we need to do is stand up and knock the guy's teeth out the backside of his head. Learn. Over the internet, they can throw stones at us from afar and, pretend that they've got some authority they never have. Money's created out of thin air, and if you don't know that yet, you don't know anything. You're just ego. I mean, these people are everywhere. You need to. We need to say, okay, fine. Do your thing, but you're not in our forum.
Okay, well,
We're about
uh,
solution,
so
and
money created not from thin air, Mike. Let's tell people definitively.
it's an obfuscation of our currency. They take our. You go to the bank, you write out a contract to pay back a debt, which they only call themselves the principal, but charge you interest as if they're going to give you evidence of their property, and all they do is produce a further representation of your very own promissory obligation because
It's courtroom. All they keep talking about is the fact that you signed the contract, folks. They let the court case be about that. And because we don't move the court case from whether or not we signed a contract as being the issue, which of course it's not,
yeah.
but that's what they shift you in the courtroom. That's what the courtroom process is doing, folks. It's getting you to say, well, hey, did you sign this contract or didn't you?
Yes,
If
and,
you
and that's why
so,
this person asked this question, who do we owe the debt to?
yeah.
Well, if it's created out of thin air, we can't owe it to anybody, but somebody's creating it and they've obfuscated it into a debt, and we need to resolve that. And how do we do that? By saying money's created out of thin air? Obviously not. We have to dig deeper than that, and that's what we've done. We've just gone around and around in circles, repeating this explanation over and over again. And people say, well, I don't really get it. Well, because you never listened once, really, is the truth. You never have listened if you don't get it.
Like, but you see, people need to understand, Mike, that courts are not set up for justice, folks. They're set up, and I want you to be real clear about this. The courts are set up to simply determine who entered the contract under what circumstances of your contractual ability, nothing to do with whether the actual contract itself was even remotely possible or feasible. That's not
Right.
what they're adjudicating on. They're only adjudicating on whether did you sign the contract and agree to this, whether it's impossible or otherwise.
That's why
You,
our resolution through this mandate is two pronged. We are going to advocate that we paid the debt by issuing like irredeemable promises to pay. Done deal. If you can do it, so can we. If that was a representation of your possession, so is this. It's not redeemable from you. Yours isn't redeemable from you. Mine isn't redeemable from me. We have a like standoff here. How do you resolve that in a court of law unless you bury into the bowels of the obfuscation? And when you do that, sorry, banker, you lose there too.
that's why, of course, they've changed the courts. The courts used to be courts of law and justice, and they've changed them into administrative processes, folks. They're no longer courts of law. They're administration. They're dens of iniquity, really, but they're
Mm-hmm.
administrative processes. They're
Mm-hmm.
tribunals. What
Mm-hmm.
they're doing is they're just saying, okay, today all we're interested in making a determination about is whether or not you accepted the liability. And then if you foolishly let them know you did, and you can't quantify or qualify why you did, and if you can't quantify and qualify that the contract you entered into, and you made an honest mistake. What was the honest mistake? Mike Montagna has just explained the honest mistake you made, because, as I said, unless you understand mathematically perfect economy, you don't know the honest mistake you made even.
Right, and that's why another aspect of the other prong of this is that you can print this mandate out and offer it to the court in defense of your position. In other words, when they can't raise the question because the question is already answered, and they don't want to raise it because it's answered conclusively to the destruction of the bank's case. So the best that they can do is claim that it's inadmissible evidence, which isn't a fact at all because it's the whole crux of the matter. So the conundrum of the judge is, do I honor the bank, which would be to perform the administrative process, or do I have to depart from procedure here because when I go outside, I have to live with my decision, you see? And this is the prevailing thing. And so if instead Michael Tillinger's case was argued as I presented to him to argue it, he'd prevail in that case, and we would have set a precedent. Every
Well,
judge in South Africa would say instead, well, look, it's already been evaluated, it's been decided. And this is why we can't afford for people to go out there with a half-baked obfuscation of our own arguments, pretending that they're defending themselves.
I need to make a comment on the Michael Tellinger audio. I put that up as a podcast to download from the podcast page, folks, and I put it there for a reason. The reason I put it there is not so you'd think, oh, one, and in fact, maybe I should put a note there, not so you'll go and think, hey, Vin is promoting what Michael Tellinger does and says there. I don't. I like Michael Tellinger enough as a guy. I've talked to the guy. I think he's a nice guy. I know, Mike, you had a bit of a barney with him, but fine. I personally, I thought he was a nice enough guy, okay? Now, the reason I put it up, folks, one, the judge in the case doesn't understand anything about economy. Nothing. Number two, he listen to what the judge focuses on. The judge is only focusing on the contract, and he only wants to know whether or not Michael agreed and signed the contract. That's all he wants to know. Now, Michael then started this sideshow. Really, it's all he started bringing up all these really irrelevant points to the contract. They're irrelevant. Now, what Mike is talking about is it's a separate issue, folks, and it's before the contract. I think that's the important part, Mike. Would you agree?
It's not only before the contract, it comprises the environment within which the contract is to be performed, in which environment the banking system, the obfuscation of the currency, makes it impossible to fulfill the contract, which is why Michael is in the situation that he's in, and all the rest of us are as well, not to his discredit, you know.
Yeah.
The banking system is what makes it impossible to fulfill our contracts. It puts us out of work. It expatriates our industry. It saddles us with a terminal sum of indebtedness, which dedicates the entire circulation to servicing debt as opposed to sustaining the industry and commerce, which are saddled with the debt. And that's why he can't make the payments. And the fact of the matter isn't that he doesn't owe a debt. You know, we can't be just issuing houses for free for signing a contract and then saying we don't have to fulfill it. We have to understand these issues. And the fact of the matter is that the bank isn't providing anything of commensurable, consideration, which justifies a debt to the bank, as I've said, and we're back to that point again, that instead the obligation remains to pay and to retire principal from circulation. A debt doesn't exist to anything so long as the integrity of the currency still represents redeemability to the real creditor who gave up the house for evidence of the promissory obligations.
Let's do the Celtic Tiger economy in Ireland, Mike, real quick. It's as simple as this, folks. Every year, as the so-called Celtic Tiger economy model that we were told existed, which is a complete lie, every year, throughout its progression, all the government were basically doing was allowing the citizenry to borrow more and more and more and increase the so-called national debt by more and more and more, leaving the so-called government with no option but to borrow more and more and more. And eventually, we're told the banks said, no more. Now, unless you pass all your natural resources to us, we're not even going to finance you for next year, even at your bare minimum amount, in which case you're going to have to make savage cutbacks to your so-called fake budgets, if you will. It was that it's, I mean, I know I'm oversimplifying it there, but that's the basis of it. Now, when you perpetuate a system like that onto the so-called citizenry you supposedly serve, there's a word for that. It's not a pretty word, and it's treason. Absolutely treason. But it's not just treason on your own citizenry. Because of the position you're putting your citizenry in, to go and attempt to go to other nations to swizz them basically out of their natural resources using your money with this huge obligation associated with it. That's impossible.
It's not even the present that you're swindling, it's the future. It's future generations.
It just goes on and on and on, but it only goes on and on to a certain point. And the certain point is when your dollar unit, euro unit, whatever currency unit you're using becomes so worthless. Again, the story of a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a pan of bread. I don't know whether that's true or not, but once you get to that point, folks, the currency's blown out according to them, and they try to, well, basically
put a new currency up there.
Yeah, Chapter 11.
Give the same thing a new name.
They do what they call a reorganization. That's the process.
Allow you to have creditworthiness again and just start the whole thing over again.
Exactly. So they say, okay, well, we've now seized your forests or your fisheries, your mineral rights. You don't really have an awful lot left. Tell you what, here's this new currency. We'll take on what we've taken before. Here's this new currency that we're going to lend to you at interest again under the same scheme, which is impossible to pay back. But it'll last for 70 odd years, perhaps. Now, the euro, as we know, Mike, only lasted about 10 years so far.
Yeah, and the Federal Reserve System, proposition promised to solve all the problems it could only cause, and it precipitated in the world's first Great Depression, but 15 years after it began. Not just in the United States, worldwide, it collapsed the world economy in 15 years. Oh, we know how to do it better now. We'll charge less interest. No, same result, just takes a little longer.
The euro, this is what people need to understand. The euro is the exact same Federal Reserve System that was imposed on the American people. That's the exact same system that's come to Europe, folks. And if we're lucky, we have, I don't even think there's a year left before we end up with the European version of the Great Depression, which of course will be, it'll be used for all sorts of dramatic draconian laws to be passed. Mike, I mean, here's the thing. What about the laws that were passed during the so-called laws, during the American Depression, for example, with movement of people?
Oh, not only were they restricted in their movements, but they were forced to stay away from areas. Homeless people aren't allowed to live in Los Angeles. Yeah. You're not allowed to live. I mean, it's already happening. This is not a future projection. It's the truth. And I mean, I've even seen it in the town council of our little town here. I've seen people fear, and here we live in a place that 4,500 foot elevation and severe winters, as if we're really a threat to homeless people, and have people here in this town want to pass a resolution that homeless people can't be here.
It's illegal to beg now, Mike. Did you know that? It's illegal to beg.
Yeah, because there would be too many people doing it that, it would just sicken us every day.
They want those people to just, go out to the countryside and, do us a favor, get under a bush and die.
Get shot for trespassing or something,
Yeah, don't be in the city, because there's people in the city who are still attempting to keep this phony baloney system alive, and you're upsetting them by bringing home the reality of the system they're perpetuating themselves, and you're showing them their future. They don't want that.
Yeah.
They don't want that. Mike, it's 5 to 12. and I'm going to finish up at 12 o'clock because I want to get this podcasted, if that's okay with you. And I got other things I got to do, kiddie run and all that in the morning to the schools.
No problem.
Listen, I really appreciate you coming on. In fact, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and our exchange tonight, and I hope that the guys in the chat box really start to get an idea and a feeling of just how important, I know how important you know this is, Mike, and I know this is important, but I want the listeners to get the same notion in their mind that, yes, this is vital. This is as vital as inhaling and exhaling, folks.
Yeah, there's no getting around this one. And I mean, if you don't realize that it's really at the bottom of everything that's gone awry. I mean, you just trace it out and you find it. It's at the bottom.
It's the foundation, Mike. It's before you build your home, folks, you want a good foundation, right?
Yeah.
Well, MPE is your foundation for your future.
Yeah,
that's what.
Which is why it's mathematically, perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. That the two go hand in hand. In fact, mathematically perfected economy is absolute consensual representation in monetary terms.
Yeah, exactly. And can I ask you, Mike, just one last thing, if you don't mind, before we go for tonight? Again, folks, I'd like to take a moment to let it soak in. Let it soak in. Just think about it. While myself and Mike have been having this conversation, and while you've been exchanging your comments with each other in the chat box there, more than likely, on the earth, the abundant earth, I hate to even think of how many children and innocents and men and women who have either died of starvation, committed suicide because they can't find enough of these currency notes in circulation. They're frustrated, wives and husbands killing each other. There's people backstabbing each other, cheating each other, robbing each other, selling their bodies, prostituting themselves. Think of all that's gone on just since we started this conversation tonight. And everything that Mike is talking about can be resolved peacefully. We can find solutions. That's why TNS Radio, seeking solutions. Sorry, Mike, did you want to finish off on anything there?
Oh, no, that's perfectly well said. I mean, a woman called me a couple of years ago, and she said it was halfway across the country, familiar with what I do, traced me down, got the phone number, and she says, Mike, do you realize there's 125,000 children under the age of 12 homeless on the streets of just Los Angeles? I didn't know that. I can imagine 125,000 under the age of 12.
Jeez.
And I mean, the words I have to say aren't fit to broadcast. And I said, no, Kathasha, I had no idea. But that's what the government is sweeping under the rug. And I mean I'm not just saying casually when I say how many 12-year-old girls are being raped tonight in Los Angeles, because we can't get it together to say, we need to spend some time and think about this. Maybe listen to a radio broadcast twice. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I said something in 15 minutes or an hour or whatever of one of my programs that, as far as I'm concerned, that's enough that to compel decent people to verify whether or not this is the answer in their own stead. And if we can't do that, we're at fault.
Yeah.
I have a lady friend I haven't talked to for a couple of years now, because the last time I talked to her, I tried to help her with her her mortgage situation, and she's, more or less selling her body to, to the next sugar daddy who isn't going to be a sugar daddy, but she owns a substantial piece of property in a remote area and whatnot, and bought the property 20 years ago practically, and it was the original note, I think, was $93,000 for, like a square mile, and she's got horses and mules and whatever, and all on a steelhead river. I mean, pretty fabulous place to own. And she's gone into foreclosure several times over the past several years. And she's known me for 30 years as Jody. I mean, you got her. I've told you way back, what your solution is. And she says, don't you think that's just dreaming? I said, Jody, who's dreaming here? You bought this property 20 years ago. She just run down her situation. She'd paid like $250,000 for against a $93,000 debt. Here, within like 2 or 3 years of paying off the balance, she'd fallen behind 3, 4, 5 months on her payments several times because the economy is failing. And she was dreaming that by selling part of the property or something like that, and she tried to do this for years and she hasn't found a buyer, and she's going to compromise everything that she had the property for if she ever did such a thing. But that's just to make up the last, whatever, $3,000 of principal that she owes. I says, who's dreaming here? You have an unworkable situation, and things are only going to get worse. I told you that 30 years ago, and here you are, about to lose everything you've worked for in your life, and you're telling me I'm dreaming. You think about it.
Absolutely. On that note, Mike, I think we'll finish for tonight, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sounds good. Hey, great talking again, Vince. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy turning of the seal. Happy Sovereign Republic of Ireland Day.
Happy Independence Day, and wake the heck up.
Yeah, before independence is just a dream.
Exactly. Thanks very much, Mike. Good night.
Okay, good night, buddy. Talk to you soon.
August Cullifsaw, folks, and I'm going to finish appropriately